Hello. Thank everybody for being here. Thank you all for being here. As you said, my name is John Telesco. I live here in Lancaster County and have for 30 years. And I live here with my wife and 6-year-old son. And I run a remodeling company that does work all throughout Lancaster County. For the last 20 plus years, I've lived in Conestoga. And it's always been a small, quiet town of woods, forests, and farmlands. However, all of that's currently being threatened because Pennsylvania has seriously let us down. With over 8,000 frac wells in Pennsylvania, we are now one of the states that are most recklessly destroying our land and water. Now here in Lancaster County, we are being threatened by a 35-mile-long, 42-inch massive fracked gas pipeline used for export that threaten our landowners, wildlife, forests, and farmland. Pennsylvania has blatantly ignored the dangers to its natural resources and the massive contribution that fracking and gas infrastructure will have towards climate change. And in case you didn't know that as of yesterday, both PA, DEP, and FERC gave full go-ahead on the Atlantic Sunrise projects, and they plan to begin construction in 2 weeks, and that's what they plan on. I don't know that that's going to happen. So my questions for you are these. First, are you for or against the Atlantic Sunrise pipeline? And second, as an elected official, how will you help to slow climate change and stop the exploitation of our natural resources and keep fossil fuels in the ground where they belong? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, John. As a farmer, there's nothing more important to me than our environment. We've had a terrible year this year with so much moisture that our fruit farm, which normally brings 20 tons, may have 2 tons of fruit this year. And everybody in Lancaster is feeling the same pinch. Fossil fuels and carbon are the problem. Okay, we all understand this. The science is irrefutable. We need leadership that takes that understanding and translates it into actionable education and resources to be able to bring about a transition to renewables, which cannot be monopolized. The problem with fossil fuels is if you have control of the tap, you have control of the well. And we all know that this pipeline cannot make any money for that fuel industry unless it can get to the Marcus Hook and out to Europe where they want to sell it. And then we know our prices will go up. So we're going to be subsidizing the cost of this, and we need to have a smarter understanding of how to make this game work. We need to be taxing at the well site the fracked oil. I would prefer to put a moratorium on it because we all know the poison that they're pumping into the substrata, and we have no idea of the science as to how that's going to affect our aquifers and our water supplies. So we need to put a high premium on taking this gas out of the well if it's going to be allowed to come out, and we should also be taxing this pipeline infrastructure so that if there is accidents along the way, we have money to deal with those resources, and the wealth that we can get from those taxes, we can pump into the R&D for renewables. We have to transition to renewable energy sources, and our rural countryside can benefit from this because our farmlands have access to wide open space for solar and for wind, and we can take this electric power back into our urban core at a much cheaper and much safer mechanism for our environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is actually behind you.
There's another mic here.
Oh, there's another one.
If we can share this over here, this on this end. I don't know John has appeared to, but thank you, John, for the question. The short answer to the first question is yes, I'm opposed to the pipeline. We also know the pipeline is predominantly a state issue right now, not necessarily a federal issue. However, there are implications there for long-term federal involvement. As far as yes, I believe and firmly committed that climate change is real, contrary to what people want to say. The science is very clear, and we need to find ways to control that. So from a policy standpoint, what we need to look at, obviously, is greater investments in renewable energy sources, greater investments in solar power, greater investments in wind power, and we need to find ways to cut down on the emissions, carbon emissions in the air. We need to cut out the pesticides in the ground. We need to cut out the pollutants in the water. We need to find ways to do those things. Taxation is one way to do that. Also, promotion of another industry and investment in renewable energy is the other way to do it. But investment in renewable energy is tough to do. If
requires, first of all, we have to re-educate our workforce. Technologies involved in those kind of jobs are pretty significant. So workforce development and taking folks who used to work in coal mines and industry and manufacturing jobs have to have retraining programs in order to get the skills necessary to work in companies that have renewable energy as their primary function. We also need to offset that and encourage tax incentive plans for companies to have investments in renewable energies. But clearly, we have to cut down those carbons both in the air and the pollutants in the ground. That's obvious. The other thing I think we need to do also is get over the rhetoric. Okay, we so much find become divisive over words like climate change. And often using climate change, we'll have these emotional arguments that take away from the real argument. The real argument is carbons and pollutants. So let's get over the climate change rhetoric and talk about reductions of pollutants and incentives for renewable energy sources.
So I agree. I agree with a lot of what's been said here. I can also say that the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline is very much more of a state issue than it is a federal issue, and that sort of limits what somebody can do at the federal level to actually address it, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that can happen. And one of the things that can happen is for whoever is in Congress to end up trying to get more involved in the regulatory process. So if whichever person on stage is lucky enough to be elected, if the pipeline has already been built, then there's going to be a lot that needs to be done to ensure that it's being used efficiently and safely. And if it's not being used safely, that we need to make the changes necessary to either make it safer or shut it down. At the end of the day, that's what it's going to come down to. Now, I think that talking about renewable energy is really the golden ticket here. Let's be honest, how many people here don't want clean water and clean air? It doesn't make sense to me, and it never made a lot of sense to me either. When we talk about renewable energy in a bad way, like it's something to be mocked, like investing in things like solar power or wind power, or some of the other possible solutions. What is the harm in actually investing in these things? If they work, we become energy independent much more quickly than anybody could have imagined that we would. If they don't work, what have we lost? Aside from maybe some of the money that we're putting into the funding for it, and that's going to be something that's happening at the economic level to begin with. It's not like people are really going to be going about doing these things without an economic incentive. They're going to be doing it because they want to be at the forefront of developing those technologies. So I think that, for Christina, it's going to be very much about investing in those technologies and to push things so that these technologies come to the forefront. Pushing things like the Paris Climate Accords, pushing things like the Clean Water Act, pushing things like the way that the Environmental Protection Agency has been gutted lately by the Trump administration. These are going to be the forefront of what she wants to do.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your question. I'm opposed to the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline. And if you look at the rationale behind them building it in the first place, it doesn't make any sense. It's a shortcut that doesn't actually do anything except expedite the speed by which they can export natural gas. And I'm opposed to fracking too. I lived in Western Pennsylvania for a decade before moving back home and saw the impact out there pretty actively about fracking and the environment. So we need to have taxes and regulation on fracking in Pennsylvania to start with, and not be exporting oil or gas from Pennsylvania and commodifying it. It's not where we need to go as a country. We need to invest in renewables. One of the things I've done in my career most recently, got an MBA with a focus on sustainability. And I know from studying business models across the country and across the world that there are so many better ways that we can operate than focusing on oil and gas as an underpinning of our economy. Europe has done amazingly well shifting toward renewable energy. They've actually had full days where countries like Germany and Norway have functioned on 100% renewables. Like they're there, and there are amazing creative ways that their communities are owning that kind of distributed network of energy, cooperatives that own windmills and solar fields, and opportunities for citizens to actually own some of the energy that they have and that they can produce naturally. this is again in opposition. One of the things that in our way with this is the power of the oil and gas industry in this country and needing to stand up against the monopolies like Exxon. Standard Oil was broken apart in the 19-teens because of monopolies in this country. And then they've grown back. We need to have, regulation on large corporations so that the power that they have isn't so absolute right now.
Thank you.